Have you ever seen someone small, someone powerless, walk straight up to the most dangerous person in the room and ask them for a favor? Like, not just any favor, but something that makes everyone around freeze up, hearts pounding, wondering if they're about to witness something they'll never forget? Picture this for a sec. You're in this massive hall, right? The kind of place where every sound echoes, where whispers carry across marble floors, and where the air itself feels heavy with unspoken rules. There's this guy, the guy everyone knows, everyone respects out of sheer survival instinct. Not because he's nice, not because he earned it through kindness, but because when he walks into a room, grown men straighten their backs, adjust their ties, and suddenly remember they've got somewhere else to be. That's power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's already in the room before he even arrives. Now here's where it gets wild. Into this world of carefully calculated moves, of people who've spent years learning how to read the smallest facial expressions, how to know when to speak and when to shut up, walks a kid. Just a child. No designer clothes, no bodyguards, no nothing. And this kid does something that makes every single person in that hall question everything they thought they knew about courage, or maybe stupidity. The child walks right up to him. The big guy. The one nobody approaches without an appointment, without layers of intermediaries, without a damn good reason and even better insurance. And in front of everyone, with a voice that's barely above a whisper but somehow cuts through all that tension like a knife through butter. Asks for something. You already passed through this kind of moment? That split second where time literally seems to stop, where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears, where you're thinking, this is either going to be incredible or catastrophic and there's no in between? That's exactly what happened. The crazy part isn't even what was asked. Nah man. The thing that really messes with your head is why this kid had the guts to ask it in the first place. What makes a child, someone who should be thinking about toys and games and like normal kid stuff, what makes them look at someone that terrifying and see something else? Something the rest of us stopped seeing a long time ago? See, here's what I've learned. The most powerful moments in life aren't always loud. They're not always dramatic. Sometimes they're just quiet, uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that makes you want to fill it with anything. A cough, a shuffle, literally anything, because the silence itself feels like it's screaming. Every adult in that room had the same thought running through their minds. What happens now? Because in a place where hierarchy is everything, where respect is currency and fear is the interest rate, a moment like this, it's a glitch in the matrix. It's not supposed to happen. It breaks every rule, spoken and unspoken. And here's what's gonna blow your mind. Stick with me till the end on this one. Seriously, the response? Oh man, the response is where this whole thing takes a turn nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. Because what happened next didn't just change that moment. It changed something fundamental about how everyone in that room understood power itself. What you're about to discover isn't just a story about a kid and a favor. It's about what happens when innocence confronts authority, when vulnerability stands face to face with strength, and when the most unexpected person in the room becomes the one holding all the cards without even realizing it. So the question becomes, when someone with nothing to lose asks something from someone with everything to protect, who really has the power? Look, real quick, before we go any deeper into what happened next, I gotta ask you something, and I'm being straight up with you here. If stories like this hit different for you, if you're the kind of person who craves something real, something that actually makes you feel something instead of just scrolling past another mindless video, hit that like button right now. I know, everyone asks for likes. But here's the thing, that simple click is literally what keeps this channel alive. It tells the algorithm, yeah, this matters, show it to more people. And honestly, stories like this one, stories about humanity, about those rare moments that remind us what we're capable of, they deserve to be seen. They need to be seen, especially nowadays when everything feels so surface level and fake. And look, if you're vibing with this, if you want more content that goes deep, that makes you think and feel and maybe see the world a little differently, subscribe. Because that's how we keep this going. That's how these stories keep reaching people who need them. It's a fair trade for real. You get content that actually matters, stuff that sticks with you long after you've closed the app, and we get to keep doing what we love. Sharing stories that touch the heart and make you reflect on what really counts in this life. It's about building something together, you know? A community of people who still believe in the power of a good story, who understand that sometimes the most important moments are the quietest ones. Alright, now back to that hall, back to that impossible moment hanging in the air like a question nobody wanted to answer. The kid didn't just wake up one morning and decide to approach the most powerful man in the room. That's not how these things work. See, this child grew up in a household where words weren't thrown around carelessly. Her mom and grandmother, Two women shaped by old-school values, the kind that don't exist much anymore. They taught her something crucial. That asking for something, really asking, requires three things most people don't have anymore: respect, responsibility, and courage. Think about that for a second. In a world where everyone demands everything, where entitlement is practically a personality trait, here's a kid being raised to understand that words carry weight. Especially when you're speaking to people who hold power, people who aren't used to hearing the word no, because nobody's brave enough to even ask the question in the first place. Now, this child had something else going on, something that made her different from other kids her age. Three things, actually, that when you put them together create this almost supernatural combination of awareness and determination. First off, she had this uncanny empathy, like she could walk into a room and immediately sense the tension hanging in the air, the unspoken conflicts, the invisible lines people were afraid to cross. While other kids were oblivious to adult dynamics, she was reading the room like a book written in a language only she understood. The second trait was this quiet courage. And I'm not talking about the loud, chest-puffing kind of bravery that announces itself. Nah, this was different. This was the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself, that doesn't challenge or provoke. It was calm, steady, like deep water that looks still on the surface but runs incredibly deep underneath. The kind of courage that makes you stand firm even when every instinct is screaming at you to back down. And third, and this might be the most important one, she had this silent persistence. You know those people who just don't give up, but they're not annoying about it? They're not pushy or aggressive, they just continue. Even when fear is whispering in their ear, telling them to stop, to turn back, to forget about it. She had that. In spades. But here's what really changes everything about this whole situation. What transforms it from just another bold move into something that hits completely different. The favor she asked for wasn't even for herself. Let that sink in. A child, approaching the most feared man in that entire world, and she's not asking for candy or money or some toy she wants. She's asking for something on behalf of someone else. Someone she cared about. Someone who'd been affected by a small, everyday injustice. The kind most people just accept because that's how things are, or that's how it's always been. This motivation didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built slowly, carefully, like layers of paint creating a picture. It came from kitchen table conversations, from stories her grandmother told about the old days when an honest request actually meant something, when a person's word was their bond. It came from the smell of simple food cooking on the stove, from memories of a time before everything got so complicated, so transactional, so cold. The leader of that group, the man everyone feared, he built his entire reputation on control. Absolute, unwavering control. His whole mindset revolved around maintaining order, keeping everything predictable, making sure every piece stayed exactly where it belonged on the chessboard. In his mind, any concession, any show of flexibility, could be interpreted as weakness. And in his world, weakness was the one thing you couldn't afford. Around him orbited these key figures. There was this older woman, a guardian of traditions, someone who watched everything with sharp eyes but rarely spoke. She understood the old ways, the unwritten rules that kept their world functioning. Then there was his assistant, this hyper-attentive guy whose entire purpose in life seemed to be preventing any change that might create instability. Any crack in the foundation. Any deviation from the script. So when this child made her request, when she stood there vulnerable and honest and brave, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. That silence, man, that silence was brutal. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was loaded with meaning, heavy with implications. For the child, it was the first emotional blow, the first moment where doubt started creeping in like cold water seeping through cracks. Did she cross a line? Did she disrespect something sacred? Did she misread the entire situation? She started second-guessing everything. That's what silence does to people, especially to kids who've been taught to be careful with their words. It makes you replay every moment, every phrase, every facial expression, looking for where you went wrong. Her mother, seeing the aftermath of that encounter, made a decision. She told her daughter not to go back to that place, not to put herself in that position again. That was the first major external obstacle. The people who loved her most trying to protect her by keeping her away from the very situation she felt compelled to address. But the second obstacle? That was internal and way more devastating. Guilt. This crushing, suffocating guilt that maybe she'd caused trouble, maybe she'd made things worse instead of better, maybe her courage was actually just foolishness dressed up in good intentions. Most people would have stopped there. Most adults would have stopped there, let alone a child. The logical thing, the safe thing, the expected thing would be to let it go, to accept that some battles aren't yours to fight, that sometimes you just have to live with injustice because that's reality. But here's the thing about setting something in motion, about speaking truth in a place where truth is usually hidden behind layers of protocol and performance. Once you do it, once you say what needs to be said, you can't unsay it. It's out there in the universe now, existing independently of you, creating ripples you can't control or predict. Something had been activated. A transformation had begun, invisible but undeniable, like seeds planted in ground that looks unchanged on the surface but is already beginning to shift underneath. The impact of that moment, that simple honest request from a powerless child to a powerful man, had created a crack in a system that was supposed to be unshakable. And here's what nobody understood yet, what couldn't be seen in that immediate aftermath of silence and doubt and guilt. The real revelations, the true bastidors of what was happening, weren't about the request at all. They were about what that request exposed, in the leader, in the people around him, and in the hidden truth about where real power actually comes from. Drop a comment right now if this is hitting different for you. Just write, the silence speaks volumes. Now I want to go even deeper into what happened next, because this is where things get really interesting, where the hidden dynamics start revealing themselves in ways nobody expected. See, as the weeks went by, something strange started happening. The child began running into situations, encounters that seemed totally random, completely coincidental. But in a closed environment like that, where everything operates on invisible schedules and unspoken hierarchies, coincidences don't really exist. Every interaction is either planned or permitted, and nothing happens without someone knowing about it. She started getting called in for small tasks. Nothing major, nothing that would raise eyebrows. Just little things that were always justified with practical reasoning. We need someone to deliver this message. Can you help organize these papers? There's something that needs to be moved from one room to another. The kind of mundane stuff that flies completely under the radar but creates opportunities for proximity, for observation, for something else to develop beneath the surface. During one of these seemingly routine moments, something clicked. The child noticed an ancient symbol, something connected to requests made with honor, with genuine respect. Now, this wasn't just random decoration or meaningless imagery. This was something deeply cultural, something her grandmother had talked about in those kitchen table stories, those late-night conversations about how things used to be done, when honor and integrity weren't just words people threw around but actual principles people lived by. That recognition created this foundation, this emotional and logical framework that would later support a massive shift in understanding. It was like finding a key you didn't even know you were looking for, one that might unlock doors you didn't realize were there. And here's where the transformation really started becoming visible, where the impact of that initial request began manifesting in tangible ways. The environment itself started changing. Slowly, subtly, but undeniably. More natural light started filtering into that hall that had always felt so heavy and oppressive. The air didn't feel as thick anymore. The smell of fresh coffee began replacing that stale, weighed-down atmosphere that used to dominate the space. Even the voices changed. People weren't speaking with that same hard edge, that constant undertone of threat or challenge. Conversations became a little softer, a little more human. It was like watching ice slowly thaw, revealing the water that was always underneath but had been frozen solid for so long everyone forgot it was even there. The older woman, the guardian of traditions who'd been watching everything unfold with those sharp, knowing eyes, she started making her move. She approached the child, offering support in that discreet way that doesn't draw attention but makes all the difference. She saw something in this situation, an opportunity to resurrect values that had been buried under years of fear-based control, under systems built on dominance rather than respect. For her, this wasn't just about one child's request. It was about reclaiming something essential that had been lost. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. The assistant, that hypervigilant guy whose whole purpose was maintaining stability and preventing change, he started getting uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. He'd begun hearing whispers, catching fragments of conversations where people were actually discussing what the child had done. The request that was supposed to be ignored, to fade into insignificance, was instead becoming a topic of conversation. People were talking about it when they thought no one was listening. That kind of buzz, that undercurrent of discussion in a place where everything is supposed to be controlled, that's dangerous. That creates instability, unpredictability. Everything he was designed to prevent. So tension started building from multiple directions, creating this pressure cooker situation where something had to give. And the leader? The man at the center of all this? He started testing the child. Not in obvious ways, not through direct confrontation, but through these carefully orchestrated difficulties. Small obstacles that appeared naturally but were anything but natural. Each one designed to see if she'd crack, if she'd give up, if she'd reveal herself to be just another person asking for something they didn't deserve. Every tiny victory the child achieved came at a cost. There was the shame of being watched, judged, evaluated constantly. The physical exhaustion of having to prove herself again and again. The emotional toll of being exposed, vulnerable, always under scrutiny in an environment where vulnerability was usually exploited, not respected. Then came the breaking point, that crucial moment where everything could have fallen apart completely. The child was given a simple task, something any competent person should have been able to handle easily. And she failed. Just completely botched it. Maybe it was the pressure, maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was just bad luck. Doesn't matter. The result was the same. She was reprimanded. Not cruelly, not with violence or overt cruelty, but with that cold disappointment that cuts deeper than anger ever could. That sense of, we gave you a chance and you proved us right to be skeptical. The kind of rejection that makes you question everything about yourself, your judgment, your worth. That night, alone in the darkness, she cried. Quiet tears that nobody saw, nobody heard. The kind of crying that comes from feeling like you've let everyone down. The person you were trying to help, your mother who warned you, your grandmother whose stories gave you courage, and most painfully, yourself. The weight of having dared to ask, of having stepped outside the lines, of having believed that things could be different. It all came crashing down on her small shoulders. This is where most stories end, right? This is where people give up, where good intentions get crushed under the reality of power structures and hierarchies and the way things have always been. This is where the system wins, where the message gets reinforced that you should stay in your lane, know your place, accept things as they are. But here's what nobody understood yet, what even the child herself couldn't see through her tears and exhaustion and doubt. The real test wasn't whether she could complete tasks perfectly. The real test was happening in the minds and hearts of everyone watching, everyone involved in this unfolding drama. Decisions were being made behind closed doors, perspectives were shifting in ways that couldn't be measured or observed directly, and the truth hidden beneath layers of tradition and fear was starting to work its way to the surface. The backstage machinations of power were being exposed, not through rebellion or confrontation, but through something far more subversive. Genuine, vulnerable honesty in a place that had forgotten what that even looked like. Now I really want to hear from you because I know this is hitting home for some of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you did something with pure intentions, where you stepped up for someone or something you believed in, but the pressure almost made you quit? Where the cost of doing the right thing felt too high, where doubt and exhaustion and fear almost convinced you to just let it go? Drop your story in the comments. Seriously. Your experience matters here, and sharing it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to keep going with whatever they're facing. Now I want to go even deeper into what happened during this period because this is where the whole dynamic shifted in ways that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. About halfway through this 9-month journey, something completely unexpected went down. There was this ancient cultural celebration that got revived, brought back from what felt like the dead. We're talking traditional music that hadn't been played in years, simple rituals that most people had forgotten even existed, food prepared with the kind of care and attention that comes from recipes passed down through generations. And here's the wild part. All of this had been subtly planted throughout the story in these tiny, seemingly innocent mentions. The grandmother's stories, the symbols the child recognized, those kitchen conversations about how things used to be done. It was all building toward this moment, this resurrection of something that connected everyone to a shared past they'd been disconnected from for way too long. But for the child, this celebration wasn't some magical, easy moment. Nah, this was terrifying. She was facing two massive obstacles that would have broken most adults, let alone a kid. First, there was the sheer fear of exposure, of being visible in front of everyone who'd been watching, judging, testing her for months. In that kind of environment, visibility is vulnerability. Every eye on you is a potential threat. Every moment of attention is a moment where you could fail, where you could be rejected, where you could prove all the doubters right. The second obstacle was even more insidious. This silent resistance from people who simply didn't believe in her intentions. Not because they had proof she was lying, but because in their experience, in their worldview shaped by years of cynicism and manipulation and people using kindness as a weapon, genuine goodness seemed impossible. Like a concept from fairy tales, not something that actually exists in the real world where power and survival are what matter. So imagine being that child, standing there knowing that half the room is waiting for you to mess up, expecting you to reveal yourself as a fraud or a fool. That's the kind of pressure that makes your voice shake before you even open your mouth, that makes your heart pound so hard you can feel it in your throat, that makes every second stretch out like an eternity. But she participated anyway. Her voice trembled, yeah. You could hear the fear in it, the uncertainty. Her hands probably shook. Her heart was definitely racing like she'd just run a marathon. But she stayed. She didn't run, didn't hide, didn't make excuses or back down. She showed up and did what needed to be done, carrying all that fear with her but not letting it make her decisions. And that moment, that act of showing up scared but committed, that created something profound. It sparked a transformation that rippled through everyone present, but especially through the leader himself. Because suddenly he's watching this child embody something he'd forgotten was possible. Courage that doesn't come from strength or status or the ability to hurt others, but from commitment to something beyond yourself. Here's where his whole mindset started cracking. He realized something that completely destabilized his understanding of power and control. The child's request, the thing he'd initially seen as a potential threat to his authority, wasn't actually threatening his position at all. It was revealing something that had been missing from his entire operation, from the culture he'd built, from the way he'd been leading. It exposed this void where humanity and connection and genuine respect should have been. That revelation messed with him on a deep level. It challenged the very foundation of how he understood leadership, power, respect. All these years he'd been maintaining control through fear and intimidation and careful calculation, building this empire on the premise that strength means never showing vulnerability, never admitting you might be wrong, never allowing space for something as dangerous as genuine emotion. But this child had walked into his world and, without challenging him directly, without threatening or defying or trying to take anything from him, had shown him a different kind of strength. One that made his seem hollow by comparison. So what did he do? He pulled back, withdrew, created this distance between himself and everything that was happening. And that absence, that sudden vacuum where his constant presence had been, it created massive insecurity throughout the entire environment. People didn't know how to read it. Was he angry? Planning something? About to strike back? The uncertainty was almost worse than his intimidating presence had been. While all this was unfolding, while the child was navigating these complex social dynamics and dealing with the weight of everyone's expectations and judgments, life threw another curveball. Her grandmother, the source of so many of those stories and values that had given her courage in the first place, went through a period of serious fragility. Health issues, the kind that make you realize how temporary everything is, how quickly the people we love can slip away from us. The child had to make a brutal decision. Everything she'd been working toward, all the progress she'd made, the transformation that was finally starting to take root in that rigid environment, all of it was suddenly on the line. Because her grandmother needed her. Really needed her. And what kind of person pursues their own goals, even noble ones, while someone they love is suffering? She almost abandoned the entire thing. Almost walked away from all of it to focus completely on caring for her grandmother. That sacrifice, that willingness to let go of something she'd invested so much in, it reinforced everything about her core motivation. It proved that her original request hadn't been about ego or recognition or trying to prove something about herself. It had always been about others, about making things better for the people she cared about righting small injustices because they mattered, not because she'd get credit for it. Every step forward came with a price. This wasn't some feel-good story where doing the right thing automatically leads to reward. This was real life, where integrity costs you something, where standing up for what matters means sacrificing things you value, where every advancement requires you to pay with pieces of yourself. When she finally returned to that environment, after taking time to care for her grandmother, something fundamental had changed. The way people looked at her was different. There was less skepticism, maybe, or perhaps a different kind of respect. One earned not through compliance or success but through demonstrated character. Through showing that her values weren't just words or performance, but something she actually lived by even when it cost her dearly. But the emotional weight she was carrying had multiplied. Success and progress, when they come with real sacrifice, don't feel light and celebratory. They feel heavy, complex, bittersweet. She'd proven something important, sure, but she'd also lost something in the process. Time with her grandmother, the innocence of believing that doing good would be simple or straightforward, maybe even some of the hope that had initially driven her to make that impossible request in the first place. The revelations happening behind the scenes were massive. The leader was dealing with an internal crisis about the nature of power and leadership. The older woman was seeing her hopes for cultural restoration actually materializing. The assistant was watching his carefully maintained order dissolve into something he couldn't control or predict. And the child herself was learning the brutal truth that real change, meaningful transformation, always demands more than you think you can give. The impact of one honest request made by someone with no power whatsoever was reshaping an entire social structure, exposing hidden truths about what people really valued beneath all the posturing and hierarchy and carefully maintained appearances. If you're seeing the deeper meaning here, if you're catching what this is really about beyond just the surface story, drop a comment. Change demands everything. Now I want to take you to the culmination of everything that had been building for those 9 months, because this is where all the tension, all the testing, all the transformation finally converges into something nobody could have scripted or predicted. After all that time, after the initial request, the silence, the testing, the cultural celebration, the sacrifice for her grandmother, the emotional exhaustion, the leader did something completely unexpected. He called the child in for a conversation. But here's what made it different from every other interaction they'd had. There was no audience. No public performance, no hierarchy on display, no witnesses to maintain appearances for. Just the two of them in a space stripped of all the formality and ritual that usually defined every moment in that environment. Think about what that means. For someone whose entire existence revolves around maintaining an image, whose power depends on constant performance and visible authority, choosing to meet privately without the reinforcement of his position, that's already a massive shift. That's vulnerability disguised as a simple meeting. The child walked into that room carrying the weight of everything she'd been through. The doubt, the failures, the nights of crying in silence, the fear that maybe she'd been wrong all along, that maybe her courage was actually just naivety, that maybe the people who said she should have stayed in her place were right. All of that was there in her posture, in the way she probably couldn't quite meet his eyes at first, in the trembling edge of her voice. And in that moment of raw, unguarded vulnerability, the kind that only exists when you're too exhausted to maintain pretense, when you've given everything you have and don't have energy left for performance, she admitted something profound. She told him that she'd been afraid. Afraid that she'd asked for too much, that she'd overstepped, that her request had been inappropriate or disrespectful or just plain wrong. That admission, that honest acknowledgement of her own fear and doubt, that's what changed everything. Not because it made her seem weak, just the opposite. It made her real in a way that nothing else could have. In a world built on facades and calculated moves and people constantly trying to project strength they don't actually feel, genuine vulnerability is the rarest and most powerful thing you can offer. The leader, sitting there listening to this child admit her fears, suddenly saw the entire situation with absolute clarity. This wasn't about a favor anymore. This hadn't been about a favor for a long time. This was about something so much deeper, so much more fundamental to how human beings relate to each other, how power actually works, how respect is earned versus demanded. Here's what happened in his mind, the revelation that had been building throughout those 9 months. He'd spent his entire life believing that strength meant never yielding, that leadership meant maintaining absolute control, that respect came from fear and intimidation. His whole identity, his entire understanding of himself and his role, was built on the premise that showing any softness, granting any request that wasn't calculated to serve his interests, would undermine everything he'd built. But this child had shown him a completely different kind of strength. She'd been tested, pushed, made to fail, questioned, doubted, and she'd kept showing up. Not with defiance or aggression, but with this quiet, persistent integrity that refused to be broken. She'd been willing to sacrifice her own goals for someone she loved. She'd participated in the cultural celebration despite her fear. She'd admitted her doubts and fears without trying to hide them or dress them up as something more palatable. That's real strength. The kind that doesn't need performance or audience or validation. The kind that exists whether anyone's watching or not. And confronted with that genuine article, his own carefully constructed authority suddenly seemed hollow. Not weak exactly, but incomplete. Like he'd been exercising one muscle his entire life while letting all the others atrophy, building impressive bulk in one area while remaining underdeveloped in ways that actually mattered more. The decision he made in that moment wasn't about being nice or generous or trying to appear benevolent. It wasn't a strategic calculation or a political move. It was something far more radical. It was recognition. Recognition that what the child had asked for, what she'd endured for, what she'd demonstrated through her actions and character, it deserved to be honored. Not as a favor, not as a concession from someone in power to someone without it, but as an acknowledgement that she'd earned it through means he'd never fully understood before. He granted the request. But the way he did it, the context in which it happened, transformed the entire meaning of the act. This wasn't him maintaining his position by choosing to be generous when it suited him. This was him recognizing that the old rules, the old framework for how power and respect and authority worked in that space, they were insufficient. They'd created order, sure, but they'd sacrificed something essential in the process. The impact of that moment rippled outward immediately. The rules of engagement in that environment started shifting. Not overnight, real cultural change never happens that fast, but unmistakably. The foundation began transitioning from pure authority, where respect flowed in only one direction based on fear and hierarchy, to something more balanced. Something built on mutual respect, where power came not just from the ability to control or intimidate, but from the recognition of dignity in others. The assistant who'd been so worried about instability? He had to adapt or become irrelevant. His whole role had been maintaining a system that was now evolving beyond his control. The older woman who'd seen potential for cultural restoration? She was watching values she'd thought were dead actually take root again in the younger generation. The other people in that environment, the ones who'd been watching this entire drama unfold, wondering how it would end? They were reassessing everything they thought they knew about how things worked, what mattered, who deserved respect and why. But here's the truth that makes this story so much more than just a feel-good moment. The transformation was costly for everyone involved, especially the leader. Changing your entire understanding of power and leadership and strength when you're at the top of a hierarchy, when your identity is completely wrapped up in that role, that's not liberation, at least not at first. That's identity crisis. That's having to admit that maybe you've been wrong about fundamental things for your entire adult life. That's facing the reality that the empire you built, while impressive and functional, was missing something crucial. The child didn't walk away triumphant and carefree. She'd gotten what she asked for, sure, but she'd also lost her innocence about how the world works, about the cost of standing up for what matters, about the complexity of human nature and power and change. She'd seen behind the curtain and learned that even victories come wrapped in complications. The decisions being made in those backstage conversations, in private moments when people were processing what this all meant, those were the real story. The visible outcome, the granting of the request, that was just the surface. Underneath was this massive shift in collective consciousness, this evolution in how an entire community understood respect, dignity, power, and what it means to be truly strong. The hidden truth that got exposed wasn't about one specific situation or person. It was about the fact that real authority, the kind that doesn't need constant reinforcement and performance, comes from recognizing the humanity in others rather than just demanding they recognize yours. That genuine respect is a two-way street, not a one-way flow from the powerless to the powerful. That sometimes the person with the least status in the room can teach the most important lessons, if the people in power are willing to listen. Write this in the comments if this whole concept is reshaping how you think about power. True strength recognizes strength. Look, if you made it all the way to this point, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Someone who values depth over distraction, who appreciates stories that make you think and feel something real instead of just scrolling past another piece of forgettable content. So here's what I'm gonna ask you to do. Hit that subscribe button, because if this resonated with you, there's a whole library of stories like this waiting for you here. Each one exploring these complex human moments where power, dignity, vulnerability, and courage collide in unexpected ways. You deserve content that treats you like an intelligent person capable of understanding nuance and complexity, and that's exactly what we're building together. Drop a comment right now saying, "I stayed till the end, so I know you were here for the whole journey." Seriously, it matters. It helps me understand what's connecting with you, what kind of stories need to be told next, and it builds this community of people who care about substance over superficiality. And if this story moved you, if it changed how you think about power or respect or courage even a little bit, go ahead and leave a like. That simple click tells the algorithm to show this to more people who need to hear it, who need this reminder that real strength looks different than we've been taught. There's another video right here that digs even deeper into these themes, exploring another situation where everything you thought you knew about power gets turned completely upside down. Click on it and keep this conversation going with me over there. I'll see you in the next one.